Finally, here's the third truth this morning. That because of God's grace, death is not the end. Because of God's grace, death is not the end. Now, friends, in our culture today, when somebody dies, people in secular culture will say, well, that's it. It's over. It's the end. But friends, as Christians, we don't believe that death is the end because, wait for it, we don't believe in an end. Friends, let me ask you this. When you fall asleep, what happens? Eventually you wake up. Take a look at how Luke describes Stephen's death. Remember we started this morning with Stephen, the guy who was stoned to death? Take a look at how Luke describes his death. He says, while they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold the sin against them. When he had said this, Stephen fell asleep. Now, friends, Luke, he's a doctor, right? He's a physician, which means that he totally understands the difference between somebody who has fallen asleep and somebody who is dead. And let's be clear, from Acts chapter 7, it is clear that Stephen is dead. So the question is, why in the world would Luke, the doctor, say that he's asleep? You see, as we said just before, when you fall asleep, eventually you wake up. In other words, sleep is not permanent. And so back in the time of the early Christian church, to fall asleep was a euphemism that described the process of dying. In other words, it was the signal to the believer that death was not permanent. Remember earlier I said that if Jesus died, then as his followers we also die? Well, the same is true of his resurrection. If Jesus rose, then as his followers we also will rise. We believe that when Jesus returns again, we will rise from the dead and we will experience eternity with our God. Remember the very last verse from Psalm 23? The psalmist says, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord, what? Forever. Not a few days, not a few months, not a few years, not a few decades, forever. Eternity. Time without end. And so, friends, in Acts chapter 7, what Luke is saying is that Stephen had fallen asleep. In other words, he died, but at the very same time, he was about to wake up in eternity with God. That vision that he saw of Jesus standing at the right hand of God the Father, he was about to experience that moment, the moment that he breathed his last breath. For Stephen, death was not the end. Now, friends, just like the first two truths, you and I, we know this, right? We understand that death is not the end. But here's the problem. When we obsess about death, and when we are afraid of death, we are acting like we believe that death is truly the end. That when we die, that's it. It's over. On the other hand, when we stop obsessing about death and we stop fearing death, we begin to learn how to handle death. In other words, we begin to see death for what it truly is. That death is the moment on this earth when you fall asleep and you wake up in eternity with God. Friends, how amazing will that moment be?